I'm Tom Lee, and this is Stories and Art. The story I want to tell you today is an old French folk tale, and it's called Three Perfect Peaches. And the painting that I want to look at is a painting of, guess what? Peaches. This painting is on my website, www.tomleestoryteller.net. You can go there and download a copy and print one out just like this so that you can look at it at home and I hope even make a sketch or a drawing of it. There's a lot to look at in this painting. This was painted by a woman named Fede Galizia. She lived in Italy 400 years ago. And she painted these beautiful peaches in a glass bowl. And I love the way you can see through the glass and the rim of that glass bowl and notice the skin of the peaches, the color. You can almost imagine the way they would feel and the way they would taste. Those other fruits in the painting are called quinces, and they're not in the story that I'm going to tell you today. A second painting that we can look at is this painting by a man named Jan Steen. And this is in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. And it was painted around the same time that Fede Galizia painted her peaches. This was painted in 1633. And this man, all dressed in black with his black hat and his white ruffle collar, he's a doctor. And he's feeling the pulse of this young woman who's sick on her couch at home, at her house, probably in Amsterdam. And I'm showing you this picture because the story that I want to tell you starts with a doctor and a sick young woman. Once upon a time, not your time, not my time, not anyone's time, once upon a time, there was a king who had a wonderful daughter. He loved his young daughter so much, but I'm sorry to say that she was very, very sick. And doctors came from near and far, and they shook their heads. They examined the princess, but they said, "Your Majesty, sir, we do not know what this strange illness the princess has might be, and we have no idea how it might be cured." Well, one day a mysterious doctor came from far away, and he felt the princess's pulse, and he felt her forehead and listened to her breathing. And then he said to the king, "Your Majesty, I know very well what this illness is, and I know how it can be cured. The princess must eat 3 perfect peaches." The king heard this and he said, "What? 3 peaches? My daughter needs pills, powders, potions. You're a doctor. She's sick. Give her medicine." But the doctor said, "No, no, no, no. The princess must eat 3 perfect peaches." And once more the king said, "This is ridiculous. 3 peaches will cure my daughter?" But the doctor said, "Your Majesty, I did not say 3 peaches. I said 3 perfect peaches would cure the princess. And you might find that 3 perfect peaches are rather hard to come by." Well, the king thought this was ridiculous, but still he made an announcement. He said, "If anyone can bring 3 perfect peaches to the palace, they will have a great reward." And you can imagine when people heard this, they came from near and far. A great reward just for 3 peaches? But I don't know if you've ever really looked at peaches. It's hard to find 3 perfect peaches. Just the right shape, just the right color, just the right texture, not too hard, not too soft. And people came with their boxes, their baskets, their bags filled with peaches. But when the king looked at them, he said, "No, no, no, this one is lumpy, this one is bumpy, this one is practically rotten. Away with you, away with you." And the king began to despair. He thought no one would ever bring him 3 perfect peaches. Well, it so happens there was a woman who lived in this kingdom, and she had a garden behind her house. And in her garden she had flowers and bushes and trees. And in the center of her garden was one particular tree. Can you guess what was growing on that tree? Peaches. And this woman took such good care of her tree. She made sure it got enough sunshine. She made sure it got enough water. There were never any bugs allowed near her tree. She would pull weeds from the ground. She took such good care of this tree that every peach that grew on it was perfect. Now, it so happens this woman had 3 sons. There was her oldest son, her middle son, and her youngest son. And one day, the oldest son came to his mother and he said, "Mother, have you heard the news? People say 3 perfect peaches will cure the princess, and the king will give a great reward to anyone who can give him 3 perfect peaches. Those peaches on that tree of yours are perfect, Mother. Go into the garden now and pick me 3 peaches." And the woman said, "Oh, my darling boy, of course I will." And he said, "You say you will, but you don't go. Into the garden, Mother, pick the peaches." Well, into the garden she went, and she looked at her tree, and 1, 2, and 3. Perfect. And she put them carefully into the basket, and she covered them over with a cloth, and then she gave them to her oldest son. And her oldest son said, "And what about food, Mother? Am I to have food for this journey? Quickly, Mother, quickly, make me a cake." Well, the woman made her son a cake, even though I think he was rather rude to her, don't you? But she made him a fine cake, and he took it and put it in his pocket, and he didn't even say thank you to his mother for the peaches or the cake, and he set off on his journey to the king's palace. Now he traveled far. He traveled farther than far, further than I could tell you, and twice as far as you could tell me. But he came to one place, and it was like the middle of no place. And sitting there at the side of the road was a woman, an old, old, old woman. And she looked up as the oldest son came along the path, and she said, "Good afternoon, young man. Where do you travel so far from home?" But the oldest son looked at the old woman and said, "Oh, why are you speaking to me? You are old and ugly. I don't want to talk to you. Out of my way." That's just the way he was. And the old woman said, "Oh, sir, I'm sorry to trouble you, but I haven't had any food for some time. I wonder, do you have any food that you might give to me?" And the oldest son said, "Do I have food? Of course I have food. I always have food. I have a delicious cake that my mother made for me. But you see, old woman, this cake is my cake. It's not your cake. So I can't really give it to you at all, can I?" And he ate the whole thing right in front of that poor old woman. And when he was done, he said, "Now, madam, you are in my way. Out of my way." And she said, "Oh, sir, may I ask you just one question more? What do you have in your basket?" Well, do you think the oldest son was the sort of person who would tell the truth? No, no. He looked at the old woman and he said, "In my basket? You want to know what I have in my basket under this cloth? Well, it's frogs. That's right, old woman. In my basket I have 3 bumpy, lumpy, smelly frogs." Now the old woman, she looked at the young man and she pointed her bony finger towards the basket, and she said, "Very well, very well. Frogs, you say? Frogs you shall have. Be off with you." The oldest brother hurried away down the path, and he didn't give another thought to this old woman. And finally he came to the king's palace. He walked up the stairs, he knocked on the door, and the king himself answered and said, "Yes, yes, what do you have?" He said, "Oh, your majesty, in this basket I have 3 perfect peaches from my mother's tree." And the king took the basket and he lifted up the cloth and he said, "What? What? What? You bring me frogs?" And the oldest son said, "Frogs? Well, no, your majesty, it's peaches. My mother put 3 perfect peaches in that basket." "Well, there are frogs in there now," said the king. "Look for yourself." And he pulled off the cloth and he showed it to the oldest brother, and there they were, 3 bumpy, lumpy, smelly frogs. But, guards," said the king, "take this young man and throw him into the deepest and darkest of dungeons." And they did. So much for him. Now back at home, the 2 brothers and their mother were waiting and waiting and waiting, but they never heard any further word from the oldest brother. Finally, after several days, the middle brother said, "Mother, I don't think my older brother's coming back at all. I think he must have failed. I think it's my chance to get that great reward. Quickly, mother, into the garden, pick 3 perfect peaches and put them in this basket." Do you think he said please to his mother? No, he did not. But the woman didn't seem to mind. She went into the garden and she looked again at her tree and picked 1 and 2 and 3 peaches. They were perfect. And she put them carefully into the basket. She covered them over with the cloth, and she gave them to her middle son. And just like his older brother, he said, "And what about food, mother? I need food. Make some cookies for me at once." Well, the woman did just as her middle son asked. She gave him the cookies and the basket. He turned on his heel and he walked out the door. He traveled far and farther than far. He came to the middle of no place, and there he met the old woman. And just as she said to his brother, she said, "Good afternoon, young man. Where are you traveling so far from home?" And just like his brother, he said, "Oh, why are you talking to me? You are in my way. Step aside, old woman." But she said, "Oh, sir, I am so hungry. Have you any food at all?" And he said, "Well, of course I have food. I have delicious cookies, still warm from the oven. But these are my cookies, not your cookies, old woman." And he ate them all. Honestly, can you believe this kid? Well, the old woman looked at him and said, "Sir, let me ask you just one more question. What do you have in your basket?" And he thought to himself, "Why should I tell this nosy old woman my business?" And he said, "Oh, in my basket I have snakes. Yes, 3 hissing, slithering snakes." And the old woman pointed her bony finger at the basket, and she said, very well, very well. Snakes, you say? Snakes you shall have. Be off with you." And the middle brother hurried away as quickly as he could. And he, too, came to the king's palace, walked up the stairs, and knocked on the door. And the king said, "Yes, yes, what do you have for me?" "3 perfect peaches from my mother's tree," said the middle brother. The king said, "I've heard that before." And he took the basket, he lifted it up, and he said, "What? What? What? You bring me snakes?" "No," said the middle brother, it's peaches, your majesty, I promise you." "Well, look for yourself," said the king. And there in the basket were 3 hissing, slithering snakes. "Guards," said the king, "throw this man in the deepest and darkest of dungeons." And they did. So much for him. Now, back at home, the youngest brother was pacing back and forth and looking out the door and looking down the road. And finally, after several days, he said, "Oh, Mother, Mother, I'm afraid that my middle brother must have failed too. Oh, the poor princess. She must still be sick. The king must be so upset. Oh, Mother, I know you've already given away 6 beautiful peaches from your tree, but if it's not too much trouble, do you think I could go? Would you pick 3 peaches for me to bring to the princess?" Now, for some reason, the mother thought that this boy, her youngest son, she thought he was a bit of a fool, a bit of a noodlehead. And she thought to herself, "Oh, why should I waste 3 more peaches if his older brother couldn't do it and his middle brother couldn't do it? This foolish fellow never will." But he begged and he pleaded, and she said, "Oh, very well, very well." And she took the basket and she went into the garden, and there were the beautiful peaches, each one perfect, hanging on her tree. And she thought, "I really don't want to waste them on that noodle head." Oh, but here was one. It had fallen on the ground. It was rather rotten looking, soft and squishy. And the woman said, "This will be good enough for him." And she plopped it into the basket. There was another one here, but it was hard and green. It hadn't turned ripe at all. She plopped that into the basket too. And what was this? There was a peach hanging from the tree, but it had a little worm crawling through it. The woman picked that off and said, "It's good enough for my youngest son." She dropped that into the basket too, and she covered them over with cloth, and she gave them to the youngest boy. And he said, "Oh, Mother, thank you. I hope these will cure the princess. And I'm sorry to ask it, Mother, but it is a long journey. Would it be too much trouble if I could have some food?" And the woman said, "Oh, what a fellow, you want everything. Well, I have no time to bake. Here's a dry crust of bread. You can take that." "Oh," said the youngest brother, "well, a dry crust of bread is better than nothing." And he popped it into his pocket, and he set off on his journey. He thanked his mother before he went, of course. And he traveled far, and farther than far, further than I could tell you, and twice as far as you could tell me. And he came to a place that was like the middle of no place. And sitting there was the old woman. And she said, "Good afternoon, young man. Where are you traveling so far from home?" And the youngest brother said, Oh, good afternoon, madam. Excuse me. I didn't see you sitting there. Where am I going?" "Well, I don't think you'll believe me if I tell you, but I'm going to the king's palace." Little me, all the way to the king. Can you believe it?" And the woman said, "Oh, sir, I'm sorry to trouble you, but have you any food at all? I haven't eaten for some time." And the youngest brother said, "Oh, well, excuse me, I didn't think to offer you. I should have. But I only have this dry crust of bread. But I tell you what, I'll break it in half, and you can have half, and I'll have half." But when he looked at the half that he had kept for himself, he said, I don't think that was quite fair. This half looks pretty big." So he broke that in half again, and he handed half to the woman. And he looked at his half of bread, and he said, "Something's very strange about this bread. It seems to be getting bigger." He broke that piece in half. He gave half to the old woman. He said, "I think we better eat this bread quickly before anything else happens to it." He broke it off, and the two of them ate. But I'll tell you, that bread didn't taste dry or hard or crusty at all. It tasted sweet as cake. That was strange, too. But Finally, the young man stood up and said, "Well, madam, it's been lovely chatting with you, but I'm afraid I'd better be on my journey." And the woman said, "Oh, sir, let me ask you just one question. What do you have in your basket?" Now, you and I know what was in that basket. 3 peaches, but they weren't perfect at all. But the youngest brother didn't know that. He hadn't looked under the cloth at all. And he said to the old woman, "Well, I haven't looked to see, but I hope in this basket are the 3 perfect peaches that will cure the princess." And the old woman pointed her bony finger at the basket, and she said, "Very well. 3 perfect peaches, you say? 3 perfect peaches you shall have. Be off with you." "Oh, well, thank you very much. Lovely to meet you," he said, and he turned and continued on his way to the king's palace. When he got there, he knocked on the door, and the king opened it and said, "Yes, what did you bring me? Did you bring me frogs? Did you bring me snakes?" "Snake? Why would I bring you snakes? I thought you wanted peaches. I brought you 3 perfect peaches to cure your daughter." Said the king. "I've heard that before." He took the basket and he lifted the cloth. He was almost afraid to look. What? What? In the basket were 3 of the most perfect peaches the king had ever seen. And he said to the young man, "You wait right there. I'll bring these to my daughter." Now the king took the basket and he hurried down the long corridor in the palace to the princess's bedroom. She lay there in the dark. Her forehead was covered with drops of sweat. And the king said, "Oh, my darling, do you think you could eat these 3 peaches?" And the princess said, "Father, I will try." "Oh, Father," she said, "this is too heavy for me to lift." And the king gently raised the peach to his daughter's lips, and she ate it slowly. And she said, "Oh, Father, it is very good. Do you have a second peach?" He said, "Yes." And he gave it to his daughter, and she took it. And, "Oh, Father," she said, "it's juicy and sweet. Do you have a third peach that I could eat?" He said, "Yes, my child." And the girl sat up in her bed and she took the 3rd peach. "Now that's really good, Father, you know. Oh, I like the way it drips down my finger." She said, "Oh, it's a delicious peach." "Father," she said, "what am I doing sitting in this bed? I feel perfectly well." She jumped from her bed, she danced around the room a little bit, and she said, "Father, where did you get those delicious peaches?" He said, "There was a young man. I think he's still waiting at the front door." And the girl ran to the front door and she opened it up and she said, "Oh, hello." And the youngest son said, "Oh, hello. You're the princess. I can tell you got the crown on your head. It looks like the peaches did the trick, huh?" She said, "Oh, yes, they were delicious. I'm totally cured. Will you marry me?" "What?" Just like that. And the youngest son said, "Will I? Well, sure I will." And just like that, they got married. And the only thing left to tell you is this: they lived happily ever after. So that's the story of the 3 perfect peaches, and I hope you enjoyed listening to it. Now, usually when I visit classrooms in schools, students can ask me questions and they love to make me pictures. But right now, you're not going to school and I'm not going to school. But you can still ask me questions and send me pictures if you want to go to my website, www.tomleestoryteller.net. And there's a form there, and you can send me an email and attach a picture and any questions that you have, and I'll put those pictures and questions on my website for the next story. Thanks for listening. Come and listen again.